Wonderful. So, yeah, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Ruth, who is the Head of Teaching and Learning Development at Les Roches Global Hospitality Education. And over to you, Ruth.
Hi there, and thank you so much for having me. I'm just going to get this going. Hold on one moment. Here we go. So you should be able to see my screen now.
All good.
I'm so delighted to be able to join you. I wish I'd been able to be there physically today, but the wonders of hybrid, HyFlex, whatever we're calling it, I can join you from Switzerland. In putting together my little presentation, I'm going to gallop through reflections, experiences, and possible futures in these 15 minutes. It's true that when Alex and Martin and I discussed, I realized that, well, our institution, we're certainly not pretending now that, this is going to go away. This is here to stay for us. We're an international institution, a small institution. And because of our international makeup, we have students who, for many different reasons, need to come late, be away for a while, and not have their learning disrupted. So we're finding that our HyFlex provision is being transformed at the moment to meet the needs of students with odd circumstances in a kind of a post-COVID world, as it were. But we still have students in China who are stuck in lockdown, some other countries as well. We still have traveling issues. So in putting together what I'm going to present to you now, I have tried to consider the three key moments that for me define what our approach to HyFlex was and has become, really. And a lot of what was being said before about, the technology being inconsistent, being not quite adequate, that's true for us as well. We all did this in a very, very big rush, and we're all trying to take stock now and figure out where we go from here. So in the first of my three key moments, I'm going to take you back to the summer of 2020, when we had collected data from our students on their remote learning experience. And we used that to design what we would try and do going forward as we face the prospect of some students coming back to campus and others not. We were in a rather unusual situation because we decided to interrupt our spring semester at the end of May and not do final assessments in the hope that later in the summer, people would be able to come back on campus. And some of them were, but some of them weren't. So we kind of got a head start on this HyFlex thing. We felt quite lonely. We were doing it without other institutions kind of working alongside us. And I ended up training faculty developers across the Swiss Faculty Development Network in early September. By December 2020, I suppose people had settled into HyFlex to some extent. I did a survey of faculty, which revealed, yes, they were exhausted. But also, I was really pleasantly surprised by their resilience, their pride, and their absolute determination to continue to adapt and to succeed. In this survey also, I picked up, rather than some of the resistance I had seen in the past to innovative practices, especially around digital tools, a lot of increased interest in using these new practices. And also the final thing was a really enhanced relationship between our faculty and our IT services, who had in the past been perhaps not so happy bedfellows, shall we say. Then we all thought again that in the autumn of 2021, surely things would be back to normal face-to-face teaching, but they still weren't. So I decided with a colleague in December 2021 to do a more in-depth kind of study into what was really going on. We did an interpretational phenomenological analysis called Exploring the Lived Experiences of Faculty, Negotiating the Challenges of Remote and HyFlex Delivery. And it was around my discussion of this with Martin and Alex that we realized it might be nice to speak to you guys today. I'm presenting my findings at the Academy of Management in Seattle this summer, and I've also prepared a chapter to be published in an edited book by Palgrove Macmillan. And interestingly, the paper for AOM has been awarded a prize by the Management Education Division, which I think is really evidence that this kind of in-depth research into what really is going on for faculty is incredibly important and lacking in kind of defining how we move forward and where we go. So, as I promised, jumping back to 2020, and it's interesting the title of today's symposium, because the first thing I did back in summer 2020 was trying to find some of the terminologies. Even these terminologies just needed reassessing for my faculty as we worked into HyFlex mode, face-to-face, online and remote, and the emergency provision, synchronous versus asynchronous. What can the flipped classroom do? We re-looked at all of these terminologies, and then we looked at this new big word, HyFlex. So you've been using hybrid here today, and I'll just lay out for you what we came to use as these terms. So first of all, hybrid or blended for me and for many of the Swiss institutions that I was working with represents intense synchronous periods on site, interspersed with much longer online, usually asynchronous periods of learning. That's a very, very specific learning experience. So we didn't want to use hybrid or blended to represent something which is different from something which was already very clearly defined. Concurrent online for us was kind of like lecture cast, really. You've got most of your students in the class and some people are joining online and watching the lecture on screen. And HyFlex kind of is a combination of the two for me. We had the situation with some of our students dotted all over the world, different time zones, and also having connectivity issues. What HyFlex offered was simultaneous face-to-face students, synchronous online students, so concurrent, but also asynchronous online students watching the recording later. So it combines hybrid and concurrent. It was relatively new in summer of 2020, but there were some universities doing it and doing it successfully who were able to share how challenging it was. And really, when we embarked on our HyFlex journey, we went in with our eyes wide open. You thought emergency remote was going to be hard. This is going to be many, many times harder. And I think because I didn't pull the wool over people's eyes and we worked so hard with IT, that guided our success, I think. Faculty felt supported. They felt very, very scared, but they also had a framework within which to build their practice. So the challenges, as I found in the literature, were equivalence of learning on the one hand, and we discussed all of these problems with faculty, and equality of attention on the other. And I'll share these slides later. These were the slides that I built for training purposes, just to show you how much time we spent going through what the challenges would be, and then how we might address these challenges. And to address the challenges, rather than looking at the technology, we went for a very meta approach. We really looked at how are you designing your teaching? It goes back to what Martin said earlier. People get so bogged down with the switches and the knobs and and Teams and sharing screens that they forget about the design of their teaching and learning. And so we went right back to lesson planning, to making more use of the flipped class, because the literature was telling me HyFlex takes so much more time. It just seems to suck the time out of your class, dealing with these three different populations. So how would we use flipped classroom in a new way? And finally, redesigning your scheme of work to reflect these three populations that you're dealing with: your face-to-face students, your synchronous online students, and the asynchronous ones who are going to watch the video later. I'm going to flick through a few slides here that just show the kinds of activities. Actually, I'll just stop on this one for a moment. You'll see here, and I worked on this with some colleagues that I have in the US, I actually scripted for faculty how they would speak to the students in the room, and then they would speak to the camera, to the students who were online. And then once they got all the synchronous people working, they would speak to the asynchronous students who would watch the recording later. For me, this was vitally important, that at every step of their class, they would address these three populations and make sure that each of the three populations would feel involved. And this would also, if faculty did this systematically, it would reassure them. They wouldn't get to the end of the class and realize, oh God, I didn't even speak to the online people. So this was very important for us, using this kind of scripting. And so faculty developed little plans for classes, and then came in and only then worked with the technology to try out little learning activities using their plans. And of course, we built into this digital tools. This was an opportunity to use these to create interactivity. Martin mentioned Mentimeter. I took institutional licenses for 4 that I thought would really help. Padlet, I'm sure you're familiar with it, an interactive wall, WooClap, which is like Mentimeter, Mural, wonderful for brainstorming, and Genially for more interactive course content. And so these faculty had fun playing with these. Some of them used one, some of them used all, some of them brought in their own, and we streamlined our policies around bringing in new educational technologies, fast tracking GDPR approval, all of those things to ease things up. And there was good news and there was bad news, but ultimately, once I was working with the other Swiss faculty developers in September, I really had tips for what was making our faculty successful. And I mean, these are the main tips that I give to faculty developers, but what I would say for us to realize as institutions is we need to recognize two things. The increased workload needs to be acknowledged and has to be built into planning of courses where HyFlex continues. It just takes more time to prepare, and it just takes more time and energy to deliver. And secondly, we cannot underestimate the importance of highly adaptive and constantly available, like on-call IT support. This was vital to our successes. And so when we came to December, I did this faculty survey. I'll just show you really, really quickly that the overall response, I had 30 responses, but our faculty is only 50. It's a small institution. So 30 was a reasonable response rate, but a really positive overall experience. But when you dig down a little bit, what faculty were saying was they were proud of how they coped. They felt supported by colleagues. They felt supported by IT. They really felt their teaching had improved. But if you look at those items which veer more towards the orange, they were stressed. They were worried about their work-life balance, and they weren't really sure how much they really enjoyed HyFlex, truth be told, at that stage in December 2020. So I also used the survey to try and drill down and find out, more granular detail about their experiences. The comments were extraordinary. I mean, they really were proud of what they'd done to improve their teaching. But some of the comments also alluded to it being more time consuming. And faculty really pinpointed what they would need in this survey to make things more successful. And it was all around the technology being more performative and more support. And that's basically what we put into practice going forward into 2021. So when we came to December 2021 and we did our really in-depth research around exploring their lived experiences, these were my research questions. I wanted to know how faculty adapted to meet these challenges. I wanted to know what would influence the extent to which they flourished during this period. And I wanted to be able to offer advice to management. As a faculty developer, a teaching and learning developer, I really sit in the in-between space, the third space between faculty and management. And both really, really listened to me. So I really wanted to help define management practice going forward. So as I mentioned, this was an IPA study with a small homogeneous sample. We used a critical incident visual timeline to prompt faculty to remember some key moments over this period. And we developed a list of adjectives from the literature on flourishing, on resilience, and on grit. We then crunched our data in MaxQDA. We generated illustrative document portraits, experiential statements, and code maps. And here's what we found, and this I think was what Martin and Alex found a bit exciting. We found a journey to flourishing, ultimately, wherever people started, whatever their starting point was. And for some, it was a place of excitement. For others, it was a place of terror. But wherever people started, they floundered somewhere on this journey. They all went through various struggles on this journey. But by December 2021, they were...
1 minute, sorry.
They were incredibly strong. And so on this flourishing, languishing climb, we were able to plot different profiles. And I'll just run through these profiles for you really quickly. We developed these titles. I only have a minute, so I'm not going to go through in detail, but this is all going to be published in any case. But these profiles emerged for the top flourisher, our upbeat fixer, constantly finding solutions, to our dedicated load bearer who really carried the responsibility of a heavy burden and was so worried about her students throughout. And finally, our findings say that one size in terms of support and approach does not fit all, and that we really recommend that we reduce managerialism, we really strip back controlled managing, and we really step up adaptive support, and that will fuel positive outcomes. Thank you very much.